So even though the focus of last week's preview event was to get hands-on with Merak Valley, Operation Firestorm, and the new mode in Escalation, one big element to this session was that there were way more weapons involved than there were in the beta. In fact, seemingly the entire launch lineup was available for us to play with, and there were plenty of new weapons that I tried that were really solid, as well as a few that honestly weren't all that great either. Today I wanted to run you guys through the 5 weapons that I thought were probably some of the best weapons in the game, at least from the selection that wasn't available during the beta. Now I do just need to quickly apologize if I at any point throughout the video have to essentially repeat some of the gameplay here. The downside to playing with all of these weapons and trying essentially every weapon in the game is that I only have a little bit of gameplay with each one, and so if you see any gameplay that is essentially just on repeat, my apologies, but we obviously only had a certain amount of time to play the game. Now the first weapon that I wanted to go through in this video, and this is to me probably the best weapon in the game, this was the SCAR, or as it's called in this game, the SOR 556 MK2. Now, like I said, in my opinion, this is probably the best weapon in the game, or at least very close to it anyway, and that is including all of the beta weapons too. I found myself just coming back to this over and over again because it just felt so damn good, and I think this is definitely going to be one of the more popular weapons at launch, provided it launches in the state that it was in this build anyway. Now this one operates exactly as you would expect. For a SCAR, it has a slightly slower rate of fire, but it obviously hits like a truck, and that is how the SCAR has generally worked in not only all Battlefield games, but just all shooters in general. The difference being though that I feel in most games with the SCAR, it does have a fair amount of recoil, which is obviously just to balance out the really good damage. Whereas in Battlefield 6, it felt like the recoil, albeit noticeable, was actually very, very manageable. And so I think that's probably why it felt so good in this game, because generally in most other games, the SCAR does have a lot of recoil, whereas in Battlefield 6, it just felt like a pretty normal amount of recoil that you would expect on really most other weapons. Now, I was running the SCAR with a 45 round mag as well. And then as for the other attachments, I mostly just focus on trying to improve the recoil management and stuff like that. The 45 round mag though was an absolute game changer. I'm sure you guys will know a lot of times the SCAR will just have a 20 round mag, and I believe it does in this game too, just by default. That is generally one of the bigger downsides to using the SCAR in most games, is that it always has really good stats, but then you only get that 20 round mag. And in a lot of games, even when you equip the extended mag, it usually only extends it to 30 rounds. So having a 45 round mag, that felt really, really good to me. That was probably the key reason that I kept coming back to it. I think if this only had a 30 round mag as the sort of extended mag attachment, then it still would be really good, but it probably wouldn't feel quite as good as it did with the 45 round mag, because it felt like not only you get all the benefits of the SCAR itself, having great damage output and stuff like that, but you can also chain it together and actually get multiple kills, which is something you sort of can't normally do with the SCAR. Now moving on, we have one of my favorite weapons of all time, and this is the P90, or as it's called in this game, the USG90, and I am so happy to see this back in Battlefield. This to me is, like I said, one of my favorite weapons, not only in Battlefield, but just really any shooter out there. I don't know what it is about this gun. I think it's because it looks very unique, and it also is generally kind of like a jack of all trades when it comes to the SMGs. That is sort of what I love about this weapon, and it felt very much the same in Battlefield 6. It's the type of weapon that to me just felt really, really good to use. It has really decent recoil when you consider it is an SMG. So it's kind of good at mid-range, at least for an SMG. You're obviously still going to lose those gunfights to like a assault rifle or anything like that if the other player is competent, but you can definitely hang at that sort of mid-range distance. While on the flip side, it's obviously very, very good up close. It's got great hip fire, and probably the best part about the P90 is that it has the 50 round mag by default, which is probably one of the main reasons that I love it as well. So if you like the P90 in previous Battlefield games or previous shooters in general, I would imagine you are going to like it in this game as well. It felt really good. Behind the SCAR, it was probably the best on this list. Not saying it was better than the beta SMGs. I think the SGX and maybe even the MP7 were potentially better than the P90, but it still felt like it would hang with those two, and I'm definitely keen to see how it plays once the game actually launches. Now, before we get into the rest of the weapons, if you guys are new to the channel and you are interested in more Battlefield 6 content, be sure to hit that subscribe button. There is plenty more content on the way. I'm not allowed to say what it is just yet, but the next video on the channel is going to be a very fun video with a bit of interesting information, so keep your eyes peeled for that one. Now, moving on, we've actually got a sniper. There were two new snipers in this build, those being the SV98 and the PSR, but the one I wanted to talk about today is the SV98, albeit both of these were really, really good. Now, the reason that I sort of sided with the SV98 is that it seemed essentially like the hybrid between the M2010 from the beta, which is a bit more of like a agile sniper, but also a mix between that and the PSR, which is definitely more of a heavy sniper, one of those snipers that deals really, really good damage. It's a bit more deadly, but it's obviously a bit slower ADS, a little bit slower to reload and stuff like that. But the SV98 to me felt like it was essentially just in the middle of those two. And for the way that I snipe, those are generally the type of snipers that I like the most, where they're still a little bit more agile than the real heavy snipers, but they do still hit like a truck. And so if you do enjoy sniping, I think you are going to enjoy the SV98 quite a bit. It is obviously still a one shot to the head, and so it kind of has that benefit over the PSR, where the PSR obviously is also a one shot to the head, but this one is just more agile, meaning you can move a little bit quicker, it reloads a little bit quicker, the ADS speed's a little bit quicker, and it just suits the way that I snipe a bit more. If you're more of a long range sniper, the PSR is probably best for you, but for me, I'm more of that like mid-range sniper where I'll just stay just out of distance of like assault rifles and stuff like that, but I'm still in and amongst the action as much as you can be with a sniper. And yeah, this one felt really, really good to me. Whether it was better than the M2010 ESR from the beta, I'm not entirely sure. I probably just need a little bit more playtime, but it definitely felt very, very fun to use. Now moving on, we've got a bit of a unique one here, and this is not necessarily in the list for the reasons of being one of the best weapons in the game. It was more just really unique and very fun to use. This is the SL9, and honestly, I'm not entirely sure if I've ever seen this weapon in any other shooter. It doesn't look that familiar to me. Please do correct me if I'm wrong. I don't believe we've had this in Battlefield before, but regardless, this was a very, very fun SMG to use, and it was very unique, like I said. If I had to explain how the weapon felt, it almost felt like if you tried to shrink an assault rifle down to an SMG, that is how this weapon felt. It was really accurate. It had a bit of a slower rate of fire compared to most SMGs, and it was kind of really good at mid-range, whereas it wasn't quite as good up close, which is obviously, again, not really in line with what you would expect with an SMG, but I think that's why it felt so unique, and it was just really, really fun to use. I don't know what it was about it. I think it was the accuracy. It felt like once you locked onto a target, you were just going to beam them. That being said, it didn't deal a crazy amount of damage either. So I think this is more the type of weapon that isn't necessarily going to be in the top like 10 best weapons in the game, but it's just really fun to use. And yeah, not only did it feel unique, it also just looks very unique, and I think it was just honestly a pretty cool weapon to see. Now, last but not least, we have got a classic weapon, at least for me, in the L85A3, which for some reason has its actual name just the same as the SV98. I'm sure you guys will know that a lot of the weapons in modern day shooters, they don't have their actual names due to like licensing reasons and stuff like that. I think a lot of it is to do with the cost, and also a lot of it is to do with these companies not wanting to be associated with, you know, mass shootings and stuff like that, and the sort of link between those and video games, even though there isn't an actual link, but obviously all the boomers think there is, so they just don't want their name being in a video game, if that makes sense. But for some reason in this game, the SV98 and now the L85A3 do just have their regular names, which is slightly strange, but I'm not going to complain about that. Now, the reason I love this weapon, and this is a bit of Sammy lore for you guys, is that way back in the day, I was an absolute fiend when it came to Rainbow Six Vegas 2, which is essentially the previous version of like Rainbow Six Siege. Way back in the day, you may not believe this, but I was actually in the top 100 players in the world of that game, albeit it had a very small player base. And this was one of my favorite weapons in Rainbow Six Vegas 2. It's a very unique looking weapon, and it's just a weapon I've always loved, honestly. So seeing it back in Battlefield was really cool to me. It felt really, really good as well. In a way, it feels a little bit similar to the Scar, where it is a very sort of accurate weapon. It's got a slightly slower rate of fire, but it deals really good damage. And it's just that typical like mid-range beast of a weapon where up close, you're probably going to lose to SMGs. At long range, you might lose to a Scar or to a DMR type of weapon. But at mid-range, this feels like it is probably one of the best weapons in the game. And so for any of you who do enjoy fighting at that sort of mid-range distance, well, you are probably going to enjoy the L85A3 quite a bit, because this is a very decent weapon. And over the course of the whole preview session, this is probably the second weapon that I use the most behind the Scar that I mentioned earlier. Now, keep in mind, even though I've mentioned all 5 of these weapons, that doesn't mean these are the 5 best weapons in the game. These are just the 5 best, or 5 of the best feeling weapons that weren't available in the beta. So there were some beta weapons that are still objectively better than these ones. I felt like the NVO still felt really good. The SGX and the MP7 felt really solid as well. So yeah, keep that in mind. This isn't necessarily the 5 best weapons in the game at launch or anything. These are just 5 weapons that I felt were worth mentioning, so that when the game launches, you've kind of got an idea of which different weapons you can use from those in the beta. But that is going to do it for this one, guys. Thank you all very much for watching. You guys have a great day, and we'll see you all out there on the battlefield.